Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fred Nauer. I'm the Chief Flight Instructor at Thunderbird Aviation. I have everybody on mute right now, so if you have a question, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat box too to see if anybody types anything in there. Today we're going to be talking about airspace and what it looks like when you're looking at a sectional chart. I'm not recognizing any. I'm recognizing some of the students from my course, and they're probably they've already been through their private pilot course with me, then they probably have seen this set of subject areas before, because these are basically the questions I ask at the end of course test for the commercial and the private and of course just before they go for their DPE to get their check ride. So let me move over here to my Foreflight so we can start doing this. So we'll start out at my base of operations here at Crystal Airport. And you'll notice the magenta line here. I've used my Foreflight to create a hang on just a second here. Created a magenta line to that is the course that I usually assign to the private pilot students flying between Crystal Airport and all the way up to International Falls. And after we talk about the nav log side of things and everything that they need to know as far as planning this trip, I asked them, is there any way to take this trip as a private pilot or a commercial pilot VFR if the visibility is only 2 miles? Where I'm using this as more for the scenario-based side of things that the FAA likes to have as questioning for during end of courses and especially for the DPE check ride. So the first question is, can you fly this trip with 2 miles visibility? So the first question is, what kind of airspace are we in right now at Crystal Airport? And can we fly with 2 miles of visibility in that airspace? So the object of the game here is to realize that blue dashed line around the airport that represents Class D airspace. And for basic VFR, the basic answer is you need 3 miles visibility and be able to maintain 1,000 feet below, 1,000 feet above, 500 below, and 2,000 feet horizontal away from clouds. And for takeoff and landing purposes, you need 1,000-foot ceiling and 3 miles visibility. But as we go down here to the Minneapolis airspace, right above the Minneapolis airport name there, it says no SVFR. As we all remember, that SVFR stands for Special VFR, which allows you to fly with permission in airspace where you need 3 miles visibility and a 152, I call it, to be able to fly around with 1 mile clear clouds. The people who have to ask for that special VFR clearance is the tower, because the tower here at Crystal, because they're the ones that are controlling the airspace around in the Class D airspace. So you notice it doesn't say no VFR above Crystal. Hang on just a second. So we can talk to the tower and ask for a special VFR clearance. But because we're going to be flying, we could be flying around 1 mile clear clouds, the tower has to make sure that any IFR traffic that is inside that Class D airspace has either gotten to the airport and landed or taken off and have left the airspace. Because with our special VFR clearance, we're pretty much assured to be away from any IFR traffic. If we were at the very minimums at 1 mile clear of clouds, we wouldn't want to be flying clear of clouds and have an IFR guy come out of the cloud. So they're going to make sure that all the IFR traffic is gone before we do that. But then that special VFR clearance is only going to allow us to fly along our Magenta line right up there to the base of that big one right there at the top of the Class D airspace. That's where the airspace ends, and that's where the special VFR clearance disappears. So now the question is, if we're up there by Gopher VOR, can we continue this flight with 2 miles visibility? So now we have to figure out, well, what kind of airspace is around the Gopher VOR and which kind of airspace will allow us to fly. Is there any airspace there that will allow us to fly with 2 miles visibility? So as we can see there, the symbols on the chart, we have that magenta shading stuff there. We have the thick blue line that is right next to it. And then there's some airspace that's kind of hidden from view because it really isn't depicted on the chart with any special types of colorization or any symbology on the chart. So as we know, the blue lines are borders for the Class B airspace. And if we're up by Gopher, the Class B airspace starts at 4,000 feet, and we can fly around inside the Class B airspace if we get clearance, as long as we have 3 miles visibility and can remain clear of clouds. But the first part, most important part about that, is we have to have a clearance. So Class B airspace is not going to work because we need 3 miles visibility. So below 4,000 feet is Class E airspace. Class E airspace is, again, 3152, 3 miles visibility, 1,000 above, 500 below, 2,000 horizontal. So again, in the Class E airspace below 4,000 feet in this, where we are at Gopher right now, we could not fly in that. So the next thing we need to look at, getting back into a little bit closer towards Gopher, is that magenta shading right there. You notice that the magenta shading starts out dark and goes to a lighter shading in towards Gopher. And that is the symbol that says the boundary between E and G airspace, between controlled and uncontrolled airspace, is at 700 feet above the ground. So then we know that if you're in Class G airspace during the daytime, you can fly around with 1 mile clear of clouds. So if we have 2 miles visibility, when we get out by Gopher there, just north of the Class D airspace, we would have to get down into the Class G airspace in order to be able to continue this flight with 2 miles visibility. Now we have another problem there because we also have the safe altitude rules about staying 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle within 2,000 feet of the airplane in congested areas, and being able to fly at an altitude high enough that if something happens to the airplane, we're going to be able to make a safe landing on the ground. But right now, but this is just an airspace type talk we're doing today, so we'll kind of leave that rule off to the side just a little bit while we talk about the airspace symbols. So the magenta shading there, dark to light, tells us that inside that shading, all the way around the Minneapolis area, the boundary between E and G airspace is 700 feet. So we'd have to get down to 700 feet AGL in order to be able to fly here. And if Gopher VOR was the same altitude as Crystal Airport, which is 869, then we'd have to be at about 1,569 feet or less in order to be able to continue our flight with 1 mile clear clouds. So we can use the symbols on the chart in order to be able to help us figure out what airspace we are in and what kind of weather we're going to need to be able to fly in that airspace. As we continue north, and we get up past Anoka, and we get to the lake that's right underneath our route there, now we have to determine where is the boundary between E and G airspace, because we know we still have to continue to fly in G airspace, probably all the way up to International Falls in order to be able to make this trip with only 2 miles visibility. But now we have another, so there's, in this chart here, this is the TAC chart that Foreflight depicts when you pull in real close, the terminal area chart. there's no altitude listed on the lake itself. So then we have to find something close by to figure out what the altitude of the lake is, to figure out how high about, what altitude do we need to fly. So the first question is, where is the boundary between E and G airspace? We've moved outside the magenta shading now. So now the boundary between E and G airspace goes up to 1,200 feet AGL. And so above that lake, the boundary between 1,200 feet AGL and below is where we would need to fly in order to be able to fly with 2 miles visibility, because class G is, again, is 1 mile clear clouds for the VFR. So what altitude is that lake? So we can sort of assume that, because we're in Minnesota, everything is really fairly flat, that we could look at, let me make it bigger here. We can look at this tower symbol over here to try to figure out what the altitude of the ground is, since we don't have any specific designations on the in this chart telling us what the altitude of the Earth is. So as we know, we're looking at this chart, looking at the sectional chart. This is a tower that is less than an obstacle that is less than 1,000 feet AGL, and the numbers on the top of it give us information that we need to know about where the top of the tower is. The big bold number at the very top, the 1,220, is the altitude of the top of the tower, MSL. The number in parentheses is the altitude of the tower in AGL. So one of my early instructors said, okay, so what's the altitude of the ground? So you have to remember, so MSL minus the AGL gives us the MSL at the bottom. So 1,220 minus 320 is 900 feet. So now back to our lake. If our lake is 900 feet tall, let me spread it out again so we can see the magenta shading, that we're outside the magenta shading. The boundary between E and G airspace is 1,200 feet AGL. So now 900 and 1,200 feet, 900 feet MSL of the ground, 1,200 feet AGL would give us 2,100 feet MSL on our altimeter in order to be able to maintain flying with 2 miles visibility. So then as we continue on our trip here, as we get up to near Cambridge, we'd have to drop down to below 700 feet again, and we could use the tower there to figure that out. But we already did that part. Then we'd have to go back up again to 1,200 feet. Then we get up near Mora, we'd have to go down below 700 feet again and then back up. So then as we travel along here, we get to this black dot. So now in this scenario, we're trying to figure out what altitude do we need to fly in order to be able to maintain the class G airspace. Again, we're outside the magenta area, so the boundary between E and G is 1,200 feet AGL, but what does this black dot mean? Well, unfortunately, on this sectional chart, most of the time this black dot means all sorts of different things, so you have to look around the dot to figure out exactly what it means. If it says water trough or tank or something along those lines, then it's a dot depicting something that is on the Earth. But if it's a dot with a number next to it, that is telling you that it's the highest point in that area. We look at all the towers that are around there. We got one over here, that's 16 minus 400, that's 1,200 feet. There's another 1,200 feet, there's another 1,200 feet. All the way around here in the swamp, it's the ground is at 1,200 feet MSL, but the dot is the top of a hill. That is depicting that point on the Earth in Minnesota is 1,430 feet MSL. So in order to be able to fly with 2 miles visibility, we'd have to maintain 2,600 feet in order to be able to maintain our flight with 2 miles visibility. Now, again, this is not something that we would really want to do on a regular basis. I always tell my students, when you're looking at the METAR, it always says that, the visibility, like on a day like today, the visibility is 10 miles. But for some reason, when they went to METARs, 10 miles was the maximum number they could ever put in for visibility. So when the visibility drops down to 9 miles, it really looks like heck because it's a whole lot less than what you're used to. So now, here we are trying to get into International Falls. And now we have one more symbol. Now we have the blue magenta dash line around the International Falls Airport. the so the blue one was Class D airport airspace at Crystal. Now we got magenta dash line. What kind of airspace is this? This is Class E airspace all the way down to the earth. So to get into International Falls, we're going to need a 1,000-foot ceiling to take off and land there. Otherwise, 3 miles visibility and 1,000 feet above, 500 feet below, and 2,000 feet horizontal in order to be able to maintain VFR in this airspace. So could we fly into here with 2 miles visibility and land? The answer I usually look for on my check rides is, just like coming out of Crystal, you need to find somebody who controls the IFR traffic going in and out of here, or they might be able to give you a special VFR clearance. So you'd either have to look in your chart, almost at airport facilities directory, and that's the old names. The chart supplement book, that's the for International Falls, and see if there's a center or a radar operation up there that you could talk to. Now, being down there at 700 feet above the ground, that may or may not be something that you could do. So you're probably going to have to end up going to one of the other airports nearby that doesn't have Class E airspace at the surface and be able to sneak under there at 700 feet. So far we've talked about Class D airspace, Class G airspace, a little bit about Class B airspace, and Class E airspace, both above the Class G and in this case here at International Falls, where it goes down to the surface. One more thing to think about as you're coming into Minneapolis. Inside the Mode C ring, 30 nautical miles away from the Class B airport, again, I know there's lots of people on here are the unmanned aircraft listening to this talk about airspace, but for the people in manned airplanes, if you're in the Mode C ring flying around, you not only have to have a transponder with Mode C so that your airplane tells the radar folks what altitude you're at, but since January 1st last year, in 2020, you also had to have ADS-B out in your airplane, where the ADS-B system in your airplane is broadcasting your GPS position and your altitude out into the system, so that even if you're away from out of radar contact, the ADS-B is going to be able to tell them where you're at. So basically now, any place where I say Mode C is required, that's also going to be a place where in the aircraft world, the ADS-B out system is also going to be required. Okay, so now, let's go take a look at another piece of airspace here. So now we have 2 solid rings, magenta, almost the same thickness as the Class B airspace rings that we were looking at over in Minneapolis. The solid rings like this are Class C airspace. This is you have to go all the way to Green Bay or all the way down to Des Moines to find any Class C airspace. There is none. If you have the paper charts out, there's no Class C airspace in the Twin Cities sectional. So in Green Bay, we notice that, so the Class C airspace is always the same shape. Class B is whatever shape it needs to be for the airspace that the airport needs to fly in and out of that airport. Class C is always the same shape. It may be modified slightly if other airspaces are bumping up against it, but basically it's always going to be about this shape. The inner ring there around the airport is 5 nautical miles from the center of the airport. The outer ring is 10 miles away from the airport. The inner ring goes from the surface up to 4,000 feet above the airport. The outer ring starts at 1,200 feet AGL and goes to 4,000 feet above the airport. Just like in Class B airspace, we can look at the little fractions there, and that tells us exactly what the altitudes are MSL for the different portions of the Class C airspace. The top of the fraction is the top of the airspace MSL. The bottom of the fraction is the bottom of the airspace MSL, or in the case of the inner ring there, it goes all the way down to the surface. So now, being the scenario guy that I am, we're going to take off from Carter Airport and fly out towards the town of Seymour on your way out of town. They're going to be flying right along that black line. When I move the picture, that black line is going to disappear. So just keep that line in your memory here. We take off from Carter Airport and fly towards the town of Seymour, and we level off at 1,500 feet MSL. Are we in the Class C airspace? And the answer is no, because the bottom of the Class C airspace there starts at 1,900 feet. So if we're at 1,500 feet MSL, we're below the airspace. So the next question is, so we're below the airspace and mostly along that line at 1,500 feet MSL, we're going to be in Class E airspace at that point. So we're going to need 3,152, 3 miles visibility, 1,000 above, 500 below, 2,000 horizontal. But as far as the Class C airspace is concerned, if we're flying between Carter Airport and Seymour at 1,500 feet, do we have to talk to anybody in the Class C airspace? And the answer is no. If you're below the Class C airspace or outside the outer boundaries of the Class C airspace, you don't have to talk to anybody. But just like Class B airspace, there is a Mode C requirement and an ADS-B requirement for Class C airspace. So if we're down to 1,500 feet, do we need a transponder with Mode C and ADS-B out? And the answer to that question is no. I was alive when Class C airspace was invented way back in 1990, and they taught us then that the only place you need the Mode C and nowadays the ADS-B out is inside the airspace and above the airspace, where it goes up to 10,000 feet. And the reason 10,000 feet is the magic number is because above 10,000 feet, you need a transponder with Mode C anyway, and no matter what kind of airspace you're in. So basically, the Mode C airspace is inside these two rings, and on the outer ring, a big, huge tube happens and goes all the way up to 10,000 feet. And if you're anywhere inside that tube, you need a transponder with Mode C. So now, same sort of flight, but now we're outside of Carter. And we're flying in towards Carter to fly over Carter and then fly over Seymour. So now our flight is going to be this path right here. Now we're at 2,500 feet in this scenario now. Do we have to talk to anybody before we cross that outer ring? So 2,500 feet is between 1,900 feet MSL and 4,700 feet MSL. So when we cross that outer ring, we will be inside the Class C airspace. So do we have to talk to anybody? And the answer is yes. There's one piece of the distance information about Class C airspace that I didn't talk about till right now is there's the 5-mile inner ring, the 10 nautical mile outer ring, and they taught us way back last century that there was a 20 nautical mile outer area. There was no symbol on the chart like a ring for the other two. The only thing they did was put a rectangle like this on the chart, reminding you, for all you VFR pilots, that if you're within 20 nautical miles of the Green Bay Class C airspace, you have to contact Green Bay Approach. For all you young kids, that's not an app, that's Approach. Green Bay Approach within 20 nautical miles on 119.4 or 318.6. So outside the airspace, as we're heading towards Carter, then we're going to have to contact Green Bay Approach. When we were talking about Class B airspace, we said you needed a clearance to get into the Class B airspace. All you need to get into Class C airspace is to establish two-way radio communication, just like as if you're going into a towered airport in Class D airspace. So all you have to hear over the radio is have Green Bay Approach say your tail number. The example we always use is if you're up here and north of the airport and you say, I'm transiting your airspace between Carter Airport and Seymour, and they say airplane to the north, please stand by. They didn't say your tail number, so you can't come into the airspace. But if they say 536 Papa Uniform stand by, they've said your tail number, you can come into the airspace. The standby part is, I'm busy right now, I can't talk to you, but I just said your tail number so you can keep flying towards the direction you're going, and I'll call you later. So at 2,500 feet, we're going to need to contact Green Bay Approach before we cross that line to establish that two-way rated communication. And as we talked about earlier, as soon as you cross that line, because now you're inside the airspace, you're going to need to have a transponder with mode C, and you're going to need to have ADS-B out capabilities inside your airplane. So then the final situation is the same line. We're out there flying in towards Carter to fly over Seymour, but now we're at 6,500 feet. Do we have to talk to anybody before we cross that outer ring? And the answer is no, because now we're above 4,700 feet, so we don't have to talk to Green Bay Approach. But because that tube exists above the 10-mile ring all the way up to 10,000 feet, we'll need to have a transponder with mode C in our airplane in order to be able to fly the route we were talking about there over this situation here. So I got a question here, so let me take that real quick. On the flight from Carter to Seymour, why was that Class E airspace and not Class G? Was it outside the thick magenta ring? Good question. So if we're below the outer ring, and in the case of ours, in my example here, when we're flying at 1,500 feet, let me put the little line back up there. We're flying at 1,500 feet, we're not in the Class C airspace. We're outside the magenta shaded ring, where it's telling us that the boundary between E and G airspace inside that ring goes down to 700 feet. So out there on this line between Carter and Seymour, we're in the 1,200 feet. The boundary between E and G airspace is up to 1,200 feet AGL. So if we're flying at 1,500 feet MSL, we're definitely below 1,200 feet AGL, because again, it's around 1,000 feet out here, 800, 900 feet. We're below 1,200 feet AGL, so we're going to be in class, oh, I see what you're saying. So yeah, so since we're below 1,200 feet AGL, thanks for the catch, we're going to be in Class G airspace, not E airspace. Okay, so now, when I got to the Air Force in 1989, I asked around and said, I was a navigator in the Air Force, what can I do? And everybody told me, buy a logbook and learn how to be a pilot. So I spent my early days in civilian aviation down here in North Carolina. In my Air Force days, why do I always lose this? My Air Force days, I was spent at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base over here in Goldsboro. When I learned how to fly, I flew out of Kinston Regional Airport over here in Kinston. So I flew F4s, I was in Wizzo, backseater in the F4, and flew the backseat of the F4 out of there, and then learned how to fly in Cessna products as a civilian pilot out of Kinston. And here's another good point, back to the Class C airspace. If you're within 20 nautical miles but not going into the Class C airspace, it's probably a good idea to contact the contact approach, just to let them know that you're out there, and they can talk to you about other aircraft you're in the area. Anyway, so here we are in North Carolina, and so the reason I go down here during my test is because now we're going to be moving into airspaces outside the A, B, C, D, E, G airspace. The first one is these two gray circles around Wilmington. The two gray circles are a terminal radar service area. This is a holdover from the old alphabet soup airspace that we had. When I became a private pilot, I had learned about TCAs and ARSAs and TERSAs and airport traffic areas and airport advisory areas and all sorts of different alphabet soup airspaces. And by the time I became an instrument pilot in 1990, all the airspace had changed to A, B, C, D, E, G. And so the TCA, the terminal control area, became Class B airspace. The airport radar service area became Class C airspace, and the airport traffic area became Class D airspace. When they did all that switching over, the terminal radar service area didn't match any of the definitions of the A, B, C, D, E, G airspace. So rather than rip up all the radars and fire all the radar people, they just kept the TERSAs around. I think they did the I think they did that so people like me asking people questions of people going through all our programs, what the heck are the gray circles? There seems to be one of these in every sectional in the country. So now, if we're flying into the TERSA, do we have to talk to anybody? Got the same fractions over here, the 6,016 and the 6,000 in the surface for where the TERSA is. If we're VFR pilots, do we have to talk to anybody flying in that TERSA airspace? And just like one of our friends mentioned before, in this case, it's not required, but it's probably a good idea, especially in the summertime in North Carolina. If you're in the summertime in North Carolina, if it's 3 miles visibility, you go up and go flying because it doesn't get any better than that in the summertime. The haze comes over over this part of the state, especially the closer you get to the ocean. And if it's 3 miles visibility, that's as good a VFR as you're ever going to get. So if you're trying to find Wilmington Airport, even the Class D airspace is 5 miles in this case. Back in the airport traffic area days, that was always 4 miles radius. Now with the Class D airspace can be whatever size it needs to be. I think 4 is the smallest, but I've seen like this one's 5. I've seen them as big as 6 also, 6 miles in order to be able to cover the traffic area that they normally for the people that are flying into that airport. So if you're coming into the Class D airspace down here near Wilmington, you're not even going to be able to see the airport yet. So it's probably an excellent idea in this case to talk to the people in the TERSA to be able to get it. If you have your sectional chart, the frequencies for that would be on the back. If not, you can use the Foreflight stuff to pull up the frequencies, or your chart supplement book also has all that information in it too. So to fly into here, the TERSA, so back to the question, you can fly in your VFR. No, you don't have to talk to anybody, but it's probably a good idea. And some TERSAs are more hard over about that than others. I had a friend who flew into Augusta, Georgia. There's a TERSA around the Augusta airport too. And even though it wasn't anywhere near the time for the Masters tournament, they were still, she called it the tower 10 miles out, says I'm inbound for landing, and they basically scolded her for not contacting the TERSA. So I guess there's lots of big jets flying in there for all the rich people who want to go to Augusta and play on the fancy golf course. So, and it's not written anywhere that they highly suggest that you do that. But anyway, so in my case, it's probably a good idea to always do if you're in a TERSA, contact them. And like somebody just wrote to me here, there is one of these around the Fargo airport. So if you're flying up anywhere near Fargo, that's probably a good idea to contact Fargo Approach to talk to the folks who are controlling the turfs there. So then I'm going to move up the coast a little bit to this Magenta area. Magenta line with all these, the line that looks like this surrounds, in this case, the Hatteras F MOA, the military operations area. So the question I always ask is, can you fly in here VFR? And the answer is yes, but you have to see and avoid. What goes on in a MOA? Inside a MOA is high-speed military aircraft traffic that is doing random maneuvering. When I was flying in F4s, we go into the MOA and usually practice dogfight type things. We wouldn't be shooting anything. There's no bullets or bombs coming off the airplane in this situation. You know, the only thing we're shooting at each other is gun camera film, or nowadays it's probably videotape. But so they may look like they're both two airplanes just flying in a straight line, and all of a sudden they'll be turning right back into you. So see and avoid. So it's probably a good idea if you're going into a MOA, especially one as small as this one, because there's two up in northern Minnesota. The Beaver MOA is absolutely huge, and they run out over and Snoopy MOA, which is out over the Lake Superior. So if you're flying between Duluth and the Upper Peninsula, you might run into that one. Just be very careful about, but you don't have to talk to anybody. There's frequencies listed on the charts that you can use to contact them. It's usually the nearest center and air traffic control center, just to get an idea where if the MOA is active and where they might be doing, or where the other planes may be, so you can try to stay out of their way. So then we move up the coast just a little bit more, and now we have the blue border that almost looks the same, except not as the MOA one, except now it's blue. This blue border is surrounding a restricted area. Can you fly VFR in a restricted area? The answer is it depends. First, you got to figure out this one you have to talk to them before you can go in there, because what happens in a restricted area is all the books call it invisible hazards. What does that mean? That means bombs and rockets and missiles and bullets and stuff flying around so fast that you can't get out of the way. So if that stuff is going on, they're not going to let you in there. But if that stuff is not going on, then you can then you still have to ask permission, but they may let you fly through the restricted area. Then the reason I go down here when I'm asking these questions is because the only place to find this next kind of special use airspace is out over the ocean. This is a warning area. The warning area is absolutely huge. It's the same blue line that's around the restricted area. It goes all the way down here and all the way out here over the edge of the earth, and it comes back around and wraps around. So the warning area here is absolutely huge. Can you fly VFR in a warning area? The answer is yes. But what goes on in a warning area? The answer is it depends. When I was at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, me and my pilot would hop on our F4, and we'd have 1 or 3 other airplanes flying with us. We got to go out over the ocean and do MOA stuff, high-speed intercepts, to see if we could find each other on the radar and maneuver our airplanes to get in a position to be in a position of advantage over the other airplanes. But it could be restricted area stuff. You could have the Navy out here shooting off those big guns. But since we're more than, it depends on what part of the country you're at, 3 miles, 12 miles off the coast, we're flying over international waters. If you're over international waters, we can't restrict you from being there. But if an F4 flies by at the supersonic speeds, or one of those shells the size of a Volkswagen goes by your airplane, we warned you. That's as good as we can get out here over the ocean. These little zipper symbols out here are the boundaries between controlled and uncontrolled airspace at non-standard altitudes. So the boundary between the E and G airspace. So you see 1,700 feet MSL there, 1,300, 5,500, 2,700 feet MSL. Rather than having to go up and down like we did on our little example on our trip between Crystal and International Falls, this says that the boundary between E and G airspace is flat. Now it's out over the ocean, so it would definitely be flat even if it was still 1,200 feet. But if you saw one of these symbols over the landmass, that's exactly what it's telling you. Rather than having to figure out where all those altitudes are and fly the airplane 1,200 feet above or 700 feet above the ground, the boundary is flat. If the symbols had the 1,700 feet MSL in there, if you're above 1,700 feet MSL, you're in Class E airspace, and you have to have Class E weather minimums. If you're below 1,700 feet MSL, you're in Class G airspace, and you'd have to do the which one I click. Okay, you're going to be in Class G airspace and have to use Class G weather minimums. So back up to the coast, move up one more, and now we have the magenta symbol again, the magenta border, and then now it's surrounding an alert area. An alert area, can you fly in VFR in an alert area? The nice thing about it is they finally, when I first started this way back last century, the alert area was a blue color. Well, now they've made it the same color as the MOA because it's basically the same rules. You can fly in there VFR. You don't have to talk to anybody in the alert area. Obviously, if you're going into the Class D airspace, you'd have to do that. But if you're in the alert area, you don't have to talk to anybody. But what is it? The alert area is an area of concentrated flight training. When I first started this, the only place I saw alert areas was like this one around Cherry Point Marine Corps Air Station, where they teach the Marine Corps pilots how to fly the F-35 jump jet and the Osprey, those things, because they're the only pilots brave enough to get in those airplanes that can take off straight up into the air, like a helicopter. But it's not only military airspace. I'm going to zoom us out here and take a quick trip down to Florida for another alert area. This one down here is just outside Daytona Beach Airport. And the reason this alert area exists is because Daytona Beach is the home of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. And what I usually say to my students is about every 2 hours, there's about 100 different airplanes out there all doing stalls and falls and steep turns, because that's the main practice area for Embry-Riddle. So it can be civilian folks too, not just military for the alert area. So then, one of the things I used to do when I was flying out of Kinston was being able to go out to fly out the Outer Banks of North Carolina, because the Outer Banks had all sorts of neatly painted lighthouses out there. So we'd fly up the Outer Banks to look at the lighthouses, and now you know where they are because they put a GPS symbol there for where all the lighthouses are. But then we have to worry about this blue line with the dots in it. What is the blue line with the dots in it? Well, we look up there, it says Cape Lookout National Seashore. This symbol here is around wildlife areas. VPATO down there is just the name of that GPS point. I don't even know where to stand. Since everything in GPS has to have a 5-letter identifier, they've really gone crazy trying to come up with different letter combinations. So sometimes you can read the word, sometimes you can't. It looks like the potato or something. But anyway, blue line with the dots on it is a wildlife area. It's right, in the back, and this symbol is on the back of the sectional chart if you're looking for it, not in the legend itself. And on the back of the sectional chart, it says that it's recommended that you stay, it's recommended, not required, requested, not required, that you stay above 2,000 feet AGL. Now again, if you're below 2,000 feet AGL, what's your real reason to be down there? You know, but if you wanted to go down low to be able to get pictures of the lighthouses, it's just easier to fly out over the water, get away from that area. One more time, I'm doing a quick trip across the country here, over to this red dot. But if you see a magenta symbol with a little magenta dots inside there, that is a sanctuary. And as you can see from the little note out there in the water, flight operations below 1,000 feet AGL over the designated area within this sanctuary violate NOAA regulations. And NOAA has the authority to take your airplane away and restrict you from flying in that airspace ever again in your whole life. So be very, very careful. If you see something that looks like this, it's almost the same shape, the same symbol as the line with the blue dots, as you can see down there underneath my red circle. But it's a magenta line with magenta dots. Don't fly in there at all. It's a sanctuary, and you'll be disturbing the wildlife. And AOPA's on their high horse about this. They don't like that NOAA has the authority to do things with airplane situations, taking your ticket away. They're doing stuff that the FAA should be doing. So don't fly in a sanctuary. Okay, back across the country. So as we're flying up the Outer Banks here, if you've ever read the book, Hunt for Red October, it's the book, not the movie. When they, let's see, where is it? There it is, Hatteras Inlet. At one point in the book, they're hiding the Red October from the Russian sub that's trying to destroy it. And so they brought the Red October inside the Outer Banks here to hide it for a while, and they brought it in through the Hatteras Inlet. Just a little extra piece of information there. Another piece of special use airspace is something else I used to fly when I was coming out of doing F4 stuff out of Seymour Johnson. These gray lines on the chart. There's VR and IR that you can see there on this section here. This is a military training route, because you can only the rule for flying below 10,000 feet is no faster than 250 knots. These lines here allow the military to fly faster than 250 knots inside the training route itself. It's about 5 miles wide. If there's 2 digits in the number, then then pieces of it may be about 1,500 feet AGL. If there's more than 3 digits in the number, then the whole thing's below 1,500 feet AGL. So basically, it's low-level stuff. In my F4, we'd be down at 500 feet above the ground, flying around at 500 knots. And flying into this restricted airspace up here where we'd fly and do some sort of tactic, and there's all sorts of targets in the letter A area here. So also out here on the East Coast is this blue line with the squares on it. These are in various places across the country. They're called Special Flight Rules Areas. This one's the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Area Special Flight Rules Area. Basically, inside a Special Flight Rules Area, the rules of Part 91 have been modified slightly to accommodate what's going on inside that. To modify the Part 91 rules for the stuff that's going on in there. There's one up in New York City. There's 2 of them up in New York. One of them's for the Statue of Liberty. The rules are fly down the east side of the Hudson River, fly around the statue, come back up the west side of the river, so everybody's in a nice little loop rather than coming in from all sorts of different directions. There's one over the Grand Canyon. There's about 20 different rules about flying over the Grand Canyon. But of those 2 airspaces, if you don't follow the rules, the FAA is just going to have to talk to you. In this one here, the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Area Special Flight Rules Area, okay, some people online call this a Romulan neutral zone. If you don't follow the rules here, you can either, the least thing they can do is arrest you, the worst thing they can do is shoot you out of the sky. So if you're going to go into the Washington, D.C. Special Flight Rules area, you got to go to AOPA and take the Washington, D.C. Special Flight Rules area course. What it's going to tell you is if you're IFR, follow your IFR flight plan, fly where they tell you, squawk what they tell you. If you're VFR, you have to file a VFR flight plan. And you have to open that flight plan. When you get close to the airspace, find the little symbol on there that tells you the frequencies of the ATC for that area and contact ATC, because before you enter the special flight rules area, you have to have a discrete squawk code, which means one that's only for the one that's assigned only to your airplane. And for the VFR, you can only enter where there's a gate. So here we have the Wino gate. Going around here, we got Grubby and BRB, and out over here is the Fluky gate. You have to choose the gate that's closest to the airport you want to land at. So in the case of Manassas Regional Airport, you'd have to come in through the Fluky gate. Early on, you could only do one full stop landing. I think now they've modified that. You can go in and do traffic patterns if you want. But basically, you go through the Fluky gate, land in Manassas, do what you want to do, take off, and come back out through the Fluky gate. There's no sightseeing around anymore. You get inside the blue line with the squares, and you're not talking ATC, and you're not squawking correctly, they may send an F-16 or a Black Hawk helicopter out after you. And at this point, all they're trying to do is get you to land someplace. And when you land someplace, there'll be police there waiting for you to arrest you and ask you many, many questions about why you're flying inside the Washington, D.C. Special Flight Rules area without following the rules. This Special Flight Rules area has something extra in the middle that none of the others have. The Flight Restricted Zone, the middle of the circle in the middle here. This is basically there to protect Washington, all the buildings around the Capitol. From the Capitol all the way to the Lincoln Memorial, and the White House is inside there. And this is a prohibited area, same symbol as the restricted area boundary, but a prohibited area is you can't fly into it at all under no circumstances. This one's because of national security. You'll find these up in northern Minnesota. The northern ones in northern Minnesota aren't anything for any deep dark secret. They're just trying to keep you 4,000 feet above the ground, 4,000 feet MSL, above the Boundary Waters canoe area. So you can give all the canoeists a wilderness experience up there. If you get inside this area here, so they didn't catch you on the outside of the ring, and now you're inside this ring here, and it looks like you're going to threaten something on the ground, like fly your airplane into the Pentagon, like happened in 9/11, then those F-16s or Black Hawk helicopters can get permission to shoot you out of the sky. So it's very, very important to, if you're going to fly anywhere near Washington, D.C., to go to AOPA and take that special course. Okay, one final thing before we finish up today. The blue shaded line. I already talked about the magenta shading, saying where it goes dark to light, the boundary between E and G airspace goes down to 700 feet. This blue magenta shading used to be more prevalent on the chart, but the more and more of this type of airspace, the 700-foot airspace that got created, it started to, they would put the blue shading around all the 700 feet stuff, and it would start to clutter up the chart. So now it's only in those those spaces where the Class G airspace goes above 1,200 feet AGL. As you can see on the northern boundary of this shaded airspace is a Victor Airway. Victor Airways contain Class E airspace. So it starts at 1,200 feet, goes all the way up to but not including 18,000 feet. It's 4 miles either side of center line. So I may run past a little bit past 2 o'clock when we finish talking about this. So if you have to go, I understand. So 4 miles away from this blue line is the edge of the Class E airspace down to 1,200 feet. So we notice getting close here, we notice that the blue shading starts dark and goes light to the outside of this trapezoid. So outside, around the whole outside of this trapezoid, the Class E airspace and the boundary between E and G is at 1,200 feet AGL. Inside here, it goes up to 14,500 feet. For those who've been flying as long or longer than I have, you'll remember back last century, the 14,500 feet was the continental control area. That was a boundary where, from the Cold War, that says if you flew below 14,500 feet without our permission, we could shoot you out of the sky. It's basically a warning to the Russians. But now the only place where 14.5 exists anymore is in this airspace here, where the Class G airspace goes up to 14,500 feet MSL. So this is why when you're looking at all the airspace information and all your textbooks and all the, and in the Aeronautical Information Manual and all those places, it talks about Class G airspace going above 1,200 feet. If you live in Minnesota, you're going, what the heck is this? I've never seen that before. And when I first started teaching up here in Minnesota, there was a blue shaded area like this in South Dakota. Then it went away. Then I found one in Montana. It went away. Then I found one in Southern California. It's gone now too. I keep waiting for this one to disappear. As soon as this one disappears, I'm going to quit asking my students this question. But you want to take off from this airport in the middle of this blue shaded area where the G airspace goes all the way up to 14,500 feet. This is where all those rules come in about Class G airspace, weather minimums all the way up. If it's daytime to take off from this airport, you need 1 mile clear clouds. But if you're going to spiral over the top of this airport and climb on up, if you get above 1,200 feet AGL, then you need 1 mile, still it's 1 mile visibility, but in the daytime you need 1,000 above, 500 below, 2,000 feet horizontal away from clouds. Above 1,200 feet AGL, all the way up to 10,000 feet MSL. Above 10,000 feet MSL, whether you're in E airspace or G airspace, day or night, because the speed limit above 10,000 feet is, with the continental United States, is basically subsonic, but really, really fast. The VFR weather minimums change to 5 mile visibility, 1,000 above, 1,000 below, and 1 statute mile horizontal, so you can stay away from all those fast moving airplanes. And then once you pass 14.5, the airspace changes from G to E again, and it remains the same thing, 5,111. And then you go all the way up to 18,000 feet, where you'd have to stop with your VFR airplane because it's Class A above that. You can only fly in an IFR airplane under an IFR flight plan in Class A airspace. But above, and that one goes up to flight level 600, which is 60,000 feet MSL. But above that, it goes back to Class E airspace again. So if you can get above 60,000 feet, flight level 600, you can fly around with 5 miles, 5,111 again. There's, in the, when I was in the Air Force, there was, one of my buddies in nav school was an old, he came out of ATC. And he said there was a urban legend going around saying that airplane, it was dark, it was nighttime, the guy working the radar was half asleep, and all of a sudden his airplane comes up on his radio and says, request flight level 900. And the ATC guy says, hey, if you can get up there, you can have it. And the guy says, descending down to flight level 900 was an SR-71 coming out of its high level spy mission. So then if we spiral all the way back down to this airport in our VFR airplane, and by the time we get down and put gas in the airplane, now it's dark, to take off from this airport, all the books you read, it says 3 mile visibility, 1,000 above, 500 below, 2,000 horizontal. But in 91, 55 basic VFR minimums, this is the only place this is written. It's not in any of the textbooks I've seen. If you're in Class G airspace in an airplane, it's written like a lawyer, so let me decode this for you. if you're in Class G airspace in an airplane, and you can fly around with a visibility of 1 statute mile, clear of clouds, as long as you stay within a half mile of the runway. So back to our little map, if we're just staying in the traffic pattern around this airport or any airport that's in Class G airspace, you can fly at night with 1 mile clear of clouds. But if you go more than a half mile away from the airport, or in this case here, because of the airspace that's above it, if you get about 1,200 feet AGL, then you need 3 miles visibility, 1,000 above, 500 below, 2,000 horizontal. And then if you get above 10,000 feet, it becomes 5,111 again. So, been noticing that you've been all chatting along here very well, and I appreciate everybody who's been helping out with the questions on the information that is there. Chunk of airspace inside Class E west of E and W.
That's Kenosha.
Oh, is there one over there too?
It's kind of an anomaly. If you look at the Chicago sectional just west of Kenosha. Now zoom out a bit. Keep going.
Okay.
Keep more. Zoom out a little more, and you see that triangle a little west-southwest of Kenosha?
Down by Silver Lake?
Camp something. I can't read. It says Camp Lake. Yeah,
Camp
right
Lake,
there.
Yeah.
So what is that triangle that surrounds Camp Lake?
So dark to light, the shading goes dark to light. So the triangle is just the shape created by the boundaries where the Class G airspace starts at 700 feet. So over Camp Lake, the Class G airspace starts at 1,200 feet, but just around that, all the way around that in that little triangle shape, the outside, and when you pass that shading, the Class G airspace goes down to 700 feet. It's just one of those places where why they didn't include Camp Lake in there maybe is because, you know, the people who fly out of there really want it to be up to 1,200 feet AGL for their Class G airspace. So it's just because of the way the boundaries are set up that it looks like it's a special symbol. And really it's just the magenta shading for the 700-foot Class G airspace. Any other questions?
I found one other anomaly at Dillon, Montana, Delta Lima, November. And if you zoom way out, keep going a little bit further, right there is good. And now flip to the low chart and you'll see lots of that Class E down to 14.5. But we don't see it on the sectional, unlike the example you showed in Arizona. I'm wondering if that's just a charting error. Yeah, you see all those dark spots?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Or it's a, because that's how I found it when they started disappearing out of South Dakota. I go to the IFR low chart and look for the brown symbols there. And that's a good question. It's either a charting error or a difference in, like I said, the blue shaded stuff has been disappearing piece by piece for a long time now. So it may just be, it might be that that stuff just disappeared and we just got the new chart for Dillon or around Dillon here, and the IFR side hasn't caught up yet.
I think it's been that way for a long time. So maybe
okay.
Maybe it's a case that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing in government.
Yeah, could be. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming. I will be doing another one the second Saturday in March. That one will be on back to the Foreflight stuff, and it'll be spending a little bit more time how to set up your airplane in Foreflight, how to do a VFR flight plan in Foreflight, and an IFR flight plan in Foreflight, and how to file it and get an aviation weather brief using your Foreflight system. I'll be doing that. I think that's because it's not a leap year. It's going to be March 13th. So it'll be the same date in March, second Saturday in March. And later on this month, keep an eye on the FAA site. And if you've attached yourself to our Thunderbird stuff, keep an eye on our director of maintenance. Will be talking for all you Piper PA-28 owners and PA-32 owners out there. He's going to be talking about that AD that just came out about what you got to do to check the wing on your PA-28 aircraft. Plus, he'll do a little bit more on preventive maintenance. But the main portion of it, he's going to show you exactly what needs to be done to do the inspection on your airplane if it's required. He'll go through the whole process of figuring out, does your airplane need to be inspected or not, and that type of thing. So thank you all for coming, and we'll see you in March.
Can I ask you one more question about the chart supplement?
Yep.
Take a look at Duluth, DLH.
Stand by.
I haven't looked at this on Foreflight, so it'll be interesting to see if it's there. When it talks about yeah, okay. If you could zoom in and scroll down to under radio aids to navigation. Scroll down a bit. A little bit further. Okay, right there. Where it says VORTAC, Delta Lima Hotel, and in the next line, TACAN/G as in golf /RCP is same as VOR/golf/RCP. What does that mean? I have never seen that before, and I'm not finding any translation anywhere.
So the RCP is now listed in the abbreviations in the front?
It's not.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I know, but and
I've not seen that in any other, chart supplement mentioned for any other airport or nav aid, just at Duluth.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to dig around and see if I can figure that out. But I do not know what that means either.
Okay.
Anything else? Alrighty, I have to run and do a ground session here at Flying Cloud Airport. So thank you all for attending today, and we'll see you next month.